I'll tell you why the Kevin Durant trade has a big impact on the New Orleans Pelicans, plus more draft talk and rumors. It's the Monday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Monday. It is draft week, and I am excited. We just wrapped up the NBA Finals. I'm recording this before Game 7, but that was a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to the draft. We just had a massive trade, and now it seems like things are going to get busy in the NBA. So we're going to break down what the Kevin Durant trade means for the New Orleans Pelicans. I want to look at the most likely guy drafted, or two most likely guys drafted for the Pelicans at 7 overall, and then some other names that you need to know, both for the 7th pick and the 23rd pick in the upcoming NBA draft. So thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. If you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. And don't forget, you can get Locked On Pelicans at 10:30 a.m. every weekday on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. So let's get into it. The trade that broke before Game 7 of the NBA Finals, which is not great for the league, but that's neither here nor there. And that is Kevin Durant being traded to the Houston Rockets from the Phoenix Suns for a package that includes the 10th pick on Wednesday's first round, or in Wednesday's first round, Jalen Green, Dillon Brooks, and 5 various second-round picks. One, the Rockets fleeced the Phoenix Suns. I think that's about as good of a return as Phoenix could get. It doesn't mean that it was a good return. All things considered, maybe, but Houston didn't give up really any of their interesting young players and maybe traded away the worst contract that they have in Jalen Green here. But what I think this does for New Orleans is creates a ticking clock, a clock that is ticking down, counting down for the Pelicans. And they weren't even involved in this trade. The Pelicans get 1 year that the current group of guys can work to compete. Because you look around the rest of the division and what do you see? It's brutal out there, right? The Rockets are now in win now mode. They were the 2nd seed in the West, and they still have tons of flexibility. They have like 5 or 6 future firsts that they can still trade, along with intriguing young guys. They didn't give up Jabari Smith Jr. in this deal, and that's someone that they could move. They often didn't close games with him. You know, the Spurs are set for the future with Victor Wembanyama, the 2nd overall pick in this draft, and they still have Stephon Castle, who was the Rookie of the Year. The Mavericks might be on 2 timelines, but 2 timelines that should work with the players they have, and soon to add Cooper Flagg to it. The Memphis Grizzlies just won 48 games, and while I think they've downgraded now that they've traded away Desmond Bane, they have more flexibility to at least improve. That's not ideal for the Pelicans. That's just the division. That's not the rest of the Western Conference here. You know, when you look at trying to time your window when you go for it, is this actually the time to try and go for it if you're the Pelicans? And you could argue the answer, given the division, is no. I think, you know, all of those teams other than maybe Memphis, and that's debatable, I think are better than New Orleans and better positioned for the, you know, immediate future and long-term future, I think. So you look at that and it's like, what are the Pelicans going to do here? Or are you just spinning the wheels to try and compete for a play-in tournament spot? And look, that can be fine too. There can be good in doing all of that. But if you really want to try and build around this core, that's expensive. The Houston Rockets are like $30 million under the luxury tax line right now. The Pelicans are basically right up against the luxury tax. They have Kevin Durant and all those other young guys and just finished with the 2nd best record in the West, right? The Pelicans don't seem to be in that realm as we're currently talking about them. Things could change here. So you get a year to prove this, right? You get a year to show like, no, this is the group that we can go and win with. And here's our proof of concept in this upcoming season. That's to me what this means. It goes to why I've been talking about maybe the team should go through a longer rebuild and wait out this conference a little bit and see what happens with this division, and see if you can time it a little bit better, because basically everyone's going for it next year, which is fun. I love that. But it's going to make it harder to get a good playoff spot or avoid the play-in tournament if you're the New Orleans Pelicans. So what does this all mean, though, right? When I say you get 1 year to prove it, what that means is it's going to come down to Zion Williamson. We haven't said that in a little bit, but that's what it comes down to here. If he plays and plays at a high level, and I'm talking all NBA level, and enough games to do it, this team can be really good. When you look at teams like the Houston Rockets, the Memphis Grizzlies, TBD with the Dallas Mavericks, right? I'm going to skip the Spurs here. No one has a player that has Zion Williamson's ceiling, at least right now. I think the Spurs and Wemby, yeah. But even on the Houston Rockets, other than Kevin Durant, again, who's 37, so keep that in mind, long term, no one could project as talented of a player as Zion Williamson. But Zion's got to play and prove it to be able to show that for you to feel confident building around him. Look, I've kind of lost a lot of that faith. You've heard me trade him on this show in a mock draft exercise we did. I've said maybe it's time to rebuild and just move on. I argued for cutting him. I'm also saying keep him and build around him because I get it. But you got a year to prove it. And the everydayers have heard me say this before. This isn't a new take that I'm having here, because otherwise you're never going to get out of the position that you're in, which is that middle ground, right? That no man's land in the NBA, which is kind of the worst spot to be in. Now, it doesn't mean you should outright tank. We've seen that doesn't entirely work as much as it used to with some of the flattened lottery odds. But even then, that's only 2-3% for some of those back-end teams, but that can clearly make a difference. So you've got to figure out exactly where you want to go. You've got to get the direction. And right now, the Pelicans are kind of trying to thread a needle, which is not easy. We talked about that on Friday's show when I talked about Cayman Malawatch, and we'll talk about him coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. But if you're trying to thread the needle, that's not easy to do. And this is going to be a real test, right? Joe Dumars is kind of thrown right into the fire with this team of you got to do something. Look, the Phoenix Suns with Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, who cares as much about him, and Devin Booker realized that they couldn't run it back. That's a more talented core, obviously, than what the Pelicans have. If they couldn't run it back, this team really needs to be careful running it back and thinking about that. You look at a couple of other teams that are like, yeah, we're not going to run it back. We're not going to do this again. That is smart. I don't love, the Phoenix Suns' future. Still cool. You get the 10th pick, but you don't control any of your future draft picks. So what's it matter? But you've got to pick a direction, kind of realize what you got to do. And I don't know if the Pelicans have done that just yet, or at least it's not being kind of like actively communicated outward. We'll see what happens on draft night and the rest of this offseason, but it'll kind of give us an answer to that question of, is there a direction, or is the direction kind of like, yeah, we're going to try and win? That's not the biggest direction to me, because how are you going to do that? We're going to start to get answers to those questions soon, but Pelicans, clock is ticking now with this move in the arms race in the Western Conference, and in particular, the Southwest Division. So could you draft a guy that makes that kind of immediate impact? Let's talk about the guys that the two most likely players, in my opinion, that it's going to be at 7 overall. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Olipop. Olipop is a new kind of soda made for people who love the classic taste of soda, but want something that supports their health. And with just 2 to 5 grams of sugar and 6 grams of prebiotic fiber in every can, Olipop is reimagining soda in a way that's better for your gut. Traditional soda is loaded with sugar. 39 grams in a regular Coke, 44 grams in an orange Fanta, right? Olipop flips that script with just a fraction of the sugar, no artificial sweeteners, and gut-friendly ingredients like Ollie Smart, a blend shown to support digestive and overall health. It's a soda that tastes like the real thing, but does something actually good for your body. I love just the classic cola flavor. It's cinnamony, there's some caramel to it, some hints of vanilla, with just a little bit of caffeine. It's awesome, it's refreshing. When I want that just classic soda taste, I've got Olipop, and it's good for me. I really don't eat a lot of sugar. I hate all of that. So having something that tastes like the real thing without all the negative, I absolutely love that. I've been drinking these constantly over the past couple of weeks. I love the classic cola. The classic grape is really, really good too. And then the crisp apple is very refreshing with the heat that we've got down here. So get a free can of Olipop. Just buy any 2 cans in store and they're going to reimburse you for one. Head to drinkolipop.com/LockedOnNBA to claim your free can and find an Olipop near you. That's drinkolipop.com/LockedOnNBA to get a free can. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast here. For your second listen, check out the 2025 Locked On NBA Mock Draft, a 5-episode series with the most comprehensive draft analysis from NBA experts, college experts, and NBA draft experts. Find the 2025 Locked On NBA Mock Draft on NBA Big Board and Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And don't forget, you can get Locked On Pelicans now on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network, channel 7.1 in New Orleans. I think it's 9.3 in Baton Rouge, though I might have that wrong. Every day, 10:30, part of a Locked On block that you're getting there. So let's get into who are the Pelicans going to draft with the 7th overall pick. Because if you nail that pick, that becomes a game changer for the team. You know, especially if that player can contribute immediately. And I said in Friday's show for the everydayers, you already heard this. I think I'm leaning towards them taking, not necessarily who I would take, but who they're leaning towards, trying to pass this information on to you, of Cayman Malawatch from Duke. You know, that is someone they are really interested in from what I've been told. He recently worked out for the team. It went exceptionally well. They seem really high on him to the point where it's like, don't work out for anybody else. Maybe we're promising that we will draft you. And you hear that all the time, draft promises, that a guy stops working out for teams because they know there's a floor of where they will go. They will land no matter whatever pick it is. And if you're Cayman Malawatch, the floor being 7 is a really good spot for you to be in. And it potentially upsets other teams if they give you a draft promise and you're like, no, I'm still going to go work out. They don't want that because they don't want a team trading up to try and get their guy. So keep an eye on where Cayman Malawatch is working out, but that is something that I think makes sense. That's the pick that maybe threads the needle the most. He could start, he could come off the bench and make an immediate impact and is a different player than Yves Missi. And I've seen Missi's recent workout clips. He looks really good, right? We're getting into the Instagram social media, like how good do they look off-season part here. We will be covering that on the Locked On Pelicans podcast, by the way. But he does look good, but he's a different player than Cayman Malawatch is. I think Thomas Sorber's probably the most like Yves Missi out there, so I'd avoid him. But Malawatch definitely gives you more rim protection, much more of a lob threat, I think, than Missi is, though Missi is 1-2. But Missi has more athleticism, probably is going to have more in his bag in terms of mid-range and things like that, and ability to score around the basket rather than just a back-to-the-basket, post-up kind of player. And Malawatch also does have the potential, I think, to also be a guy that can shoot from 3 eventually. The touch is really good there. He's done it playing international and FIBA basketball as well. There's a reason that he is this high on draft boards after his stats don't jump out at you, but all the physical tools absolutely do, in my opinion. I think this is a guy that the Pelicans really like that can contribute now and help with your ceiling for your long-term future, giving you rim protection. He's mobile, he can score inside, and he just hustles, which is the type of stuff that you like. And I do think he's going to be enough of a rim protector, rim deterrent, that's something the Pelicans need, and you could pair with Yves Missi. And now your center position is set. The other thing to keep in mind with the center position for New Orleans is, where else are you going to upgrade this? You have one viable center on your roster right now in Missi, and that's basically it. You need to get somebody else. You know, you got Kelly Olynyk, but different kind of player. So getting Malawatch in means you don't need to try and trade for a center and use future draft assets or whatever to go and kind of acquire that. So it becomes an opportunity cost kind of thing. If you have this, you don't need to spend this other stuff elsewhere, right? That's an important thing, because if the Pelicans go in with Missi as the starter, they need support depth at that position. you could get it later in the first round, but I like the bigs up at the top of the draft a little bit more, I think, than some of the guys later. But overall, I do like this draft compared to, say, last year. And look, maybe you could trade in, and we'll probably talk about this on tomorrow's show, into the second round to get a guy like Johnny Broome from Auburn or something like that I think doesn't have the highest ceiling, but I think should be able to compete just based off his pure college production at the NBA level. The other pick, though, that I think is going to maybe now be there for the Pelicans, though we're hearing some different things, is a guy like Jeremiah Fears from Oklahoma. You've heard me talking about him for months now as someone that I've really started to come around on being a bit of an ankle-breaking downhill attacker that the Pelicans just don't have. And the need for the guard position is certainly something that they've got to try and upgrade with the injury to DeJounte Murray. And if he's not going to be ready to start the year, so you need some support there, and you need more of a point guard, and that's definitely what Jeremiah Fears is. And as one of the younger players in the draft, competing in the toughest conference, just look, the dude did it. That's an important thing. A little bit undersized, which does worry me here, as well as his shooting, but the upside is there for him. I think those are the two most likely picks. I think Fears could come off the bench where you let him get the ball and let him be the best version of him. I talked about this, I think, in Thursday or Friday's show when we talked about Ace Bailey and the right situation, not the right fit, but the right situation for a guy. And if you do draft Jeremiah Fears, you need a better comprehensive development plan than you've had otherwise with some of the other guys like Dyson Daniels, where he was just never allowed to blossom into the player that you wanted to see him turn into. Is never going to happen here in New Orleans. That had more to do with New Orleans and a good bit to do with Dyson Daniels too. But again, these guys got to go to the right position, the right situation is what I'm trying to say. That's something important to keep in mind. If you draft him, to me, that does signal maybe you need to go through more of a rebuild because I don't know how impactful he's going to be as a rookie, even with the upside that he has. But maybe he shows that he can do that, right? He's got very good playmaking, particularly out of the pick and roll. The Pelicans need more of that. He's got the jumper upside for it to be good, right? 85.1% on free throws is a phenomenal thing. He's 36.1% on catch and shoot threes. That's pretty good too. He shows that he can be that, but teams aren't going to respect that from him right away. And I do worry a little bit about his strength in defending on the perimeter, but that guy also just tries really, really hard, which is something I value in players as well. So he's someone that I think the Pelicans are going to look at, and I've heard they're really high on him. They really like him too. As far as I know, and maybe this has changed after I recorded this, he hasn't had an official workout with the team just yet. They met with him and spoke to him for a while, I was told, at the draft combine and got to see him in the individual player workouts there. Something to keep in mind, I think, is guys don't need to work out for a team for you to draft them, right? The Ace Bailey thing of not working out for anyone, that's, I don't think, honestly, going to stop anybody from drafting him. I think, I and fans and others will look at this and be like, oh, this is terrible. I'm not entirely sure if it is. Teams draft guys without working them out regularly. Now, you don't want to be doing that with the 7th overall pick. You want to kind of get up close and personal and understand the player a little bit more, but I don't think it's the end of the world if that's how it ends up going for New Orleans. So, with that said, though they don't have like an official workout, and maybe that'll change in a day or so, with Jeremiah Fears, I think they've talked to him enough. They have a good idea of who he is to feel comfortable going forward. Same thing with Ace Bailey. Look, if he's there at 7, they got to at least consider him. I don't know if they will or not. And I think the Ace Bailey draft slot is one of the more intriguing things that we're going to see play out on draft night. But he is somebody that, if he's there, the upside and potential are massive. You need to at least consider it. Again, I would not trade up for him. I don't particularly love the idea of drafting him, and I'm not the biggest Ace Bailey guy, but there is talent there, and if they do that, I'm not going to trash the pick, and it's an upside play, and I get why you would do that sort of thing. So coming up next, we talked about guys at 7 right here. Let's look at some more other names that we haven't done deep dives on a ton when it comes to the 23rd overall pick, and some names that, aren't guards, aren't bigs necessarily, or aren't centers that I think the Pelicans should really look at here, including one for 7 as well that I think could be a wild card. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Monarch Money. You ever look at your bank account and go, where'd all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, it's really easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. And Monarch Money isn't just like a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center, so you can track your accounts, investments, spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. When I started using Monarch Money, I was curious, right? And then I realized how much I was spending on food delivery. So now I'm able to budget smarter and save more. And if you're going to make me juggle multiple apps, things like that, I'm never going to use it. Monarch Money, you can check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals, whether it's a car, buying a home, just putting money aside for emergencies, all in one place. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. So please subscribe, join us on YouTube, or watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. Yes, the same channel that you watch Pelicans games on. So let's wrap up the show looking at a few other names that I think are really intriguing. Guys that the Pelicans have worked out, but also not worked out. And I want to focus on one here to start with, two really, that I think could be potentially in play for the 7th overall pick, but I'm not sure. One is Cedric Coward, the wing from Washington State, 6'6". He is 21 years old, a senior, but has been rising up draft board. 17.7 points per game last season, 40% from three, 7 rebounds, and almost 4 assists. Started at D3, worked his way up, and, when you're looking for a high-end NBA comp, it's Kawhi Leonard with him. He's a really good three-point shooter. He's an excellent defender, and this is a dude that just has a great feel for the game, but also just works his butt off on the court. And with really good wingspan at 7'3", really good measurements on all of his athleticism. This is somebody who has an NBA-ready body. He's going to be a shooter right at the NBA level immediately, but can also score down low. He ran a lot of post actions over at Washington State, and it's just a smart dude. He can pass, he can defend. I think some people are worried that he is not quite there. Didn't play a ton due to injuries and things like that. But overall, this is someone who has all of the skills and tools that you are looking for, but he doesn't have enough shot creation. But given everything else, he's a pretty plug and play guy at the NBA level. Whether that's 7, I've seen some mock drafts for him in the top 5. He strikes me more as a 15, around 15 or so, but that means he could slide to 23, but also be in play for 7. It's kind of interesting with a player, of his level for everything. Another name to keep an eye on that I've started to hear a little bit more about is Noah Sengwa. I talked about him about a month ago here on Locked On Pelicans. He is a very strong looking forward from Europe right now. The numbers don't jump out at you in terms of the counting stats, but it's all the other tools, right? A 7'1" wingspan at 6'9". That's really great. He's just a very fluid playing forward that's going to be able to score, create for others, have high basketball IQ, and be a very good defender. You've seen shooting and those stats progress over his time. He's a very elite defender, in my opinion. And with that athleticism, you can see him being able to do kind of anything. He's really good at driving from the to the basket, from the perimeter too, at the forward spot. So that gives the team another dimension, another guy that can attack alongside Zion Williamson. He's a really high upside play that's going to take a while. I don't know if that fits what New Orleans really is looking to do, but that's someone that I'm pretty high on, even if I might be too nervous to draft him and pull the trigger on that. 2 more names I want to quickly look at here. Rasheer Fleming from St. Joseph's. He's a junior. He is 6'9", a 7'6" wingspan. If you're looking for your Larry Nance Jr. replacement, a guy that can shoot on the perimeter, and Fleming can absolutely do that. 41% on catch and shoot threes. That's a really good number, a very quick release too. He's a very good defender. He can play, a small ball 5 for you, potentially averaging 1.5 blocks per game along with 1.4 steals. He just kind of flies around and can do all of that. He probably projects more as a role player than a high-end starter, but I don't think that's the worst thing if you need that kind of guy and just a different sort of big man on this team, though he is not a center. Another player that the team has worked out is Will Riley, the forward from Illinois, a freshman, 12.6 points per game, 4.1 rebounds, 2.2 assists. I don't love him, truthfully. He's a wing that plays downhill, attacks, and creates and works off ball without being an elite shooter for you. 72.4% from the free throw line. That's the biggest indicator of where a guy will be when it comes to shooting at the NBA level. It's not great. 32.6% from three. But he has really good height to be kind of that prototypical switching defender. And he's a very skilled passer with really connective passes that fit within the flow of an offense. As an off-ball guy that shows really good ability to cut and knowing when to relocate to space, if you're kind of using Zion as your hub, more players that work really well off-ball is an important thing. Will Riley fits into that, but he's right around 23 is kind of where you'd rank him. I don't know if I love him as a player, but it's a guy that the Pelicans have worked out, but that doesn't always mean anything, as we talked about a little bit earlier. So a couple other names, right? There's still Austin Newell from Georgia, I think could be there. Who knows how it's going to all play out. So on draft night, I will be live from the Pelicans facility. After the pick is made, I'm just going to go live. They've told me I can do it. That's a really cool thing. We'll have the setup and the link for you very soon when it comes to all of that. So I'm excited to be there covering the draft for you all. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. We'll have more rumors, I'm sure. Tomorrow, more draft insight the rest of the week, trying to get another guest or two on. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll be with you through the draft, after the draft, into free agency. I'm not dropping to 3 days a week this offseason. It'll continue to be 7 days a week here on the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. See y'all tomorrow.